Hi, my name is Patience Nyange from Kenya. I'm a member of the Public Relations Society of Kenya. I'm very humbled and honored to be part of this season 2 of SPECTRA. Today, I'll be talking about a few things that are very important to us as we think about communications and global communication management. So, I define myself as a media, communications, and advocacy specialist. And my background is in journalism and public relations. I have served in various capacities and in various organizations in Kenya, including serving as a presenter and producer at Baraka FM in Mombasa, serving at KBC and Internews in Nairobi, and Norwegian Broadcasting Corporation in Norway, and also served as a broadcast mentor at BBC Media Action in Nairobi. As far as my public relations background is concerned, I've served as a communications advisor at the Ministry of Devolution and Planning in Kenya, as well as served as an assistant director at Chairperson's Office in charge of communications at the Kenya National Commission on Human Rights. Today, we're talking about why diversity, inclusion, and equity are more important than ever. This is really a very important topic that we discuss in most of the time we're discussing about communication and discussing about public relations. So we're looking at the state of public relations in total. Most of the time we ask ourselves, so how do we achieve this? So to tap into the full potential of human diversity, organizations need to hire diverse talent, create inclusive working conditions, underpinned by the sense of belonging, fairness, and equity. Therefore, we enable everyone to come to work knowing that they belong here. There's a sense of belonging and there's a sense of inclusion. So today, as part of this conversation, we will be discussing about a number of things, including equality, equity, diversity. We'll also be asking ourselves what are the benefits of incorporating diversity in our work culture? What are the benefits of incorporating inclusion in our work culture, and as well as inclusion and equity in our work culture? So thank you so much for everyone who is joining today. Thank you so much for being with us. We will be asking ourselves what we hope to see in the future. We're hoping for equal opportunities. We're hoping for organizations walking the walk when it comes to diversity, equity, and inclusion. We are hoping that we will achieve accountability beyond the HR or human resource function. We are hoping as well to establish a sense of belonging. We're hoping that organizations must earn trust and commitment from employees who believe that diversity, inclusion, and equity are championed in each of the organizations that they work in. We're hoping that there's going to be a continued essence of continuous efforts to review and see the progress of diversity, equity, and inclusion. So, as a starting point, maybe what we need to do is just discuss the terms that we're discussing today, which is diversity, inclusion, and equity. Diversity for me includes all the ways in which people differ, encompassing all the different characteristics that make one individual or groups different from one another. We are all unique in our different perspectives, depending on the culture that we come from, depending on the demographics that we represent, depending on the nationalities that we also represent. While diversity is often used in reference to race, ethnicity, or gender, it also includes age, nationality, originality, religion, disability, sexual orientation, social economic status, education, for others, marital status, language, and physical appearance. Inclusion, on the other hand, is the act of creating environments which any individual or group can feel welcomed, respected, supported, and valued to fully participate in decision-making processes. And therefore, an inclusive and welcoming climate embraces differences and offers respect in words and action for all people. And when we talk about equity, we're looking at the fair treatment, access, opportunity, and advancement of all people, regardless of all the differences we've spoken about, which I said includes gender, nationality, origin, religion, disability, and all that. We're trying to see and to strive to identify and eliminate barriers that have prevented the full participation of some groups. Tackling equity issues requires an understanding of the root causes and outcomes within our societies, or that cause disparities within our societies. So today, I am very happy to be part of this conversation, and we're going to talk about why diversity, inclusion, and equity are more important. I'm happy to be guided by the questions that will be sent our way by Parakit. I'm here and happy to see what conversations we can have today. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Patience, for such an insightful session. I genuinely believe that in a diverse and inclusive organization, people can work together effectively without fear or discomfort. And when organizations are committed to embracing different needs proactively, everyone wins. And in today's times, it is needed more than ever. With that being said, I do have a few questions for you. Let's start with the first step. What is your advice to organizations that wants to start focusing on DEI?
Thank you so much for your question, Parakit. I think for me, it's very important to move past having conversations. For a long time, organizations have conversations concerning diversity, equity, and inclusion. However, they do, the actual reference to how diverse are we, how are we focusing on equity, are we focusing on inclusion, is always not very practical. So I think oftentimes organizations convene workshops, conferences to discuss a topic, will provide a better on how to provide better understanding of all these terms, diversity, inclusion, and equity. However, some organizations tend to be caught up in just the conversations. When you go back to the organization themselves and you ask the organization, so how diverse are you? How many people from different cultures do you have? Or who are the people who are representing the various minority groups, for example, or the disabled groups? Then the truth is, there's always the reality does not match the conversations that the organizations are having. So what I'm saying is, I think it's important to pause the conversations and walk the talk. It's important that the organization show that when it comes to inclusion or when it comes to diversity or when it comes to equity, this is how we have achieved. So having clear deliverables or having clear report to show that these are the number of people we have when it comes to disability here, or these are the numbers, practical issues, I think for me will be very important. So what I'm saying is my first step will be to ensure that we are walking the talk. We are practicing what we preach. We are going beyond the numbers, beyond the conversations and having actual numbers, making those numbers count. So closely tied to the preceding point is that another starting point will be to examine and review existing organizational policies. A lot of organizations have policies to do with diversity, inclusion, and equity, yet some of this really hinder the initiatives that they set in the first place. So the first point of critical examination on how organization is making room for inclusion, diversity, and inclusion. How does the organization support this in its workforce? Do all the existing mechanisms we have in place achieve meaningful impact, or are they simply because it's a legal requirement? So for me, will be questions on looking at the policies that we have and also examining those processes and looking at them and saying, is this just about ticking the boxes, or are we leaving the real, again, walking the point? Are there any policies and practices that may appear to be neutral in the application of diversity, inclusion, and equity conversations? Are there any policies that are in place that hinder the achievement of the same? And if they are, then how are we tackling the same? Such inward examination is particularly important when it comes to avoiding putting out statements or gestures that will be considered as lip service, as just lip service. Because most of the time, we are very good and have very rosy words when you talk about diversity, inclusion, and equity. Yet, when you go back to our policies, some of them are actually structured in a way that hinder the same principles that we want to bring on board.
So thank you for such an insightful answer. My second question for you is, what role can a communication specialist play in driving DEI initiatives?
I think communication expert, thank you for your question. I believe communication specialists help organizations design communication strategies and package them both for external and internal communication in a very authentic and empathetic manner. By this, I mean, if we're going to have people who are probably disabled in a community or, in an organization, then we're looking at them, do we have structures that support their inclusion in that organization? Okay, so I think just having communication structures that are already in place to ensure that if we're going to have other people from the community that maybe don't come, from outside our community, this is how we engage with them. This is how we bring them on board to make them feel that they belong. With particular regard to internal communication, for example, communication experts help to bridge the gap that often exists between management and staff so as to facilitate open conversations in a manner that incorporates views, in a manner that incorporates their views and, of course, opinions, and that staff feel a sense of belonging, that they can reach the management in an easier way, that their opinions are factored in, that they feel respected, that they feel they have a sense of belonging. So this enables maybe staff to hold management accountable for all this diversity, equity, and inclusion commitments. So I think for us, it's very important, even as communication specialists, to keep reviewing the existing policies that we have in an organization, to look at them and say, is there a gap in any of this? Do they look very inclusive? And if they are we achieving this? And therefore, communicating the reports maybe when annually or maybe quarterly is too much, but probably I believe annually reports or the same will easily help drive these conversations. So I believe communication people have a role to play in ensuring that they communicate all the policies or communicate all the achievements that have been achieved in an organization as far as diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives are concerned.
Great, thank you. My next question for you would be, which is that one brand that comes to your mind when you think of DEI and why?
Yeah. So I had many brands in mind when I thought about this. But I think out of all the brands, when I tried to narrow them down, I felt like Google for me will be one of my biggest brands to talk about. Google has a rich list of diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives that they're implementing, which not only target the organization itself, but also in the industry at large. Google also works to ensure that accountability on its diversity, equity, and inclusion processes are out there, and anyone who is searching for them could easily find them. There are places, some of the organizations that I thought were really on top of my list when I searched for the diversity report. I couldn't find it, or maybe it was hard to find. But for Google, it's very practical. You easily find it there, and it has content that to show you this is how we achieved our diversity, inclusion, and equity initiatives or equity commitments in the year. Gives the year there, and you can easily see how much has been done. So I think there are very many organizations that are striving. And of course, as we said, some of the organizations look at this as just a matter of ticking the boxes, and then you can't see enough of the examples, so you can't see how practical this has been. But I think Google, for me, really tops this. I believe it has been very transparent in its initiatives. It has been very transparent in publishing its reports. It has been very transparent and actually, I think, deliberate in ensuring that all the initiatives are centered around their diversity, equity, and inclusion commitments.
Thank you. That was really helpful, and love to know more about the way the brands are really integrating DEI into their overall scheme of things. So great, thank you so much. So my next question for you is, which DEI initiative is closest to your heart that you had a chance to work on, and why?
Okay, thank you so much, Parakit, for this one. So I currently serve as a board member or one of the executive boards in an organization called BAM 2020. It's a United Kingdom initiative that works to see that public relations professionals, communications, and sports professionals, interesting, sports professionals from various countries or from various backgrounds, which includes BEM, Black, Asian, and minority, are included in their in their workforce. So what they do is they start from all the students who are in campus to ensure that they can recruit more. And as it is now, it has been for the public relations professional and communications professional, only less than 5% are people from Black, Asian, and minority communities. So what this organization does is deliberate effort in ensuring that it talks to students within schools and universities to show them that there are opportunities within the UK, where young people who are coming in any of these professions, as I said, communications and public relations, marketing and sports, can easily find a way, or can easily find internships, can easily find work, can easily find job opportunities, can easily find teaching opportunities for them to have a chance to remain within the UK. Their plan is to ensure that within the next few years, they achieve at least a 20% retention rate for people who come from background that is not white or background that is not predominantly Briton. So what they're trying to do is ensuring that we publicize their opportunities here. And these opportunities are actually open for only the minority communities within the UK, the Black, the Asian communities. What they do is they're very open to having ambassadors and very open to having the executive represent various communities. So, for example, I represent the African region as well, and the idea is to try and see, are there any initiatives that can they tap into? And part of the things that then they do is to ensure that we have, webinars, for example, or we have conversations, especially now that we are within COVID pandemic. And then there are many virtual conferences happening. So what we do is we organize for the SEM to bring on board many students and to bring on board students within universities for them to be aware that there are existing opportunities for them to remain within the UK and existing opportunities for them to be part of this conversation and to bring the numbers from the 5% that is there now to at least 20%, showing that they're very keen on organizations within the UK retaining and walking the walk when it comes to diversity, inclusion, and equity commitments. So I think this is one of it, and I feel like it's really one of the key things that I'm very proud of, because I kind of feel it aligns with the whole idea that there are many more people, regardless of their color or regardless of where they come from, who bring on board beautiful inclusion, I would say, or change of perspectives or worldviews that really are important when it comes to a workforce, that are important when it comes to the offices that we serve in, and just the whole idea of sharing spaces. We come from different continents, but we're all there united in one agenda. So currently for me, it will be BEM 2020 in the UK.
Okay, moving on to something about you and your line of work again. What has been your biggest challenge while driving DEI in your organization?
I think one of the challenges I have seen is the fact that most of the time this is just a conversation like any other conversation. It is not in the organization that I serve. I feel like people are not are not very keen to see it work, maybe, or don't see a problem. So then it happens because, like, for example, in Kenya, what we do is most of the time we have, in Kenya, we have 42 tribes. And most of the time in an organization, there will easily be a conversation about how many tribes are represented in this organization. And of course, it's not practical to represent all the 42 tribes in all the workforce that we have. However, there's always this conversation about one major tribe in Kenya is overly represented, or maybe 2 to 3 tribes, and then the rest are not there. So most of the time when you do interviews, for example, if you have applied for a job, the conversation always happens there. And there's a question about, so this department has 5 people from, let's say, Kikuyu community, or 5 people from a Taita community in Kenya, or another community, maybe like Kamba in Kenya. But the next person who gets hired there, then the question becomes, but the person who is really done well in this interview is from this community that has been overly represented. Should we take number 2 and number 3? And that conversation in most of the time always really gets heated, because the conversation is, are we taking people based on their competencies, or are we taking people to ensure that we are representing, we are taking the tribal representation. So for me, I believe that the biggest challenge is just people understanding how important it is to ensure that representation is key, and the representation in terms of diversity, and ensuring that people feel included, and ensuring that we have equity in everything that we do is very key. So I think there's a need for HR professionals, or there's a need for HR department in organization to spearhead these conversations, to ensure that every person in the office understands why it's important that we have in our representation, or in our representation of our workforce, commitments with regard to diversity, inclusion, and equity are put into consideration. So having every person understand it, whether it's from the management or the staff themselves, or whether it's from the HR department, every person feeling included and every person feeling like, I'm not alone here. But in an organization that has 200 staff, then it's possible that you can easily represent all the communities. Then just knowing that it's very important, and this is why it's important in this day and age that every person feels included, and not only just within the office that we represent, but also showing that we are taking the requirements, whether it's the requirements from the government's policies or the legal requirements, but also living the talk that we are here, we are ticking the boxes, but in the meantime, as we tick the boxes, we are actually walking the walk.
So, Patience, everyone is talking about data and analytics today and how is it sort of helping us to improve organizational decisions. So, with that in mind, how do you use data and analytics to create a long-term actionable DEI goals? Can you share a bit of information and enlighten us with details around that, please?
Okay, I think data and analytics provide a starting point for diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives because they serve as a tool for measuring the success. They serve as a tool for these initiatives. For example, organizations can keep data on the diversity of its employees. Analysis of this data can subsequently result in the identification of certain diverse inequalities, for example, or non-inclusivity, maybe consideration, or maybe non-equitable requirement process or recruitment process. So which then gives us an opportunity to actually talk about here we are. We're looking at this is where we were, this is how the data looks like, but this is how we can use analytics to support the next recruitment process so that we can be able to create a space for review and adaptation so that we can actually achieve all the set goals as far as diversity, equity, and inclusion is concerned. So for me, I think it's a very good starting point because numbers don't lie, as we say. So they provide a very critical conversation and a critical conversation that can be that can provide accountability in any organizations that we serve in. That any person who is coming from outside and has to sit down and check whether we are actually meeting the requirements as far as diversity, equity, and inclusion is concerned, then the data provides, at least provides a grounding point for conversations that are needed in organizations and even at the government level, because then we are looking at everyone included, with the hashtag leaving no one behind. So ensuring that every person, whether you are from a special group or from a minority group, everyone is included. So I think we can only achieve what we're looking for, the commitments and the truth as far as diversity, equity, and inclusion is concerned, by using data and analytics to gauge where we are and also provide a sense for the future.
And my final question for you, Patience, something that is very close to my heart, is really understanding how do you look back and see what is it that you've been able to achieve? So measurement. So how can we measure the impact of communications in driving DEI goals?
I think one of the ways we can measure the impact of communications in driving diversity, equity, and inclusion goals is by observing maybe, how comfortable and how safe employees feel to make recommendations on diversity, inclusion, and equity matters, and to call out what is not working in a healthy and respectful environment. Sometimes people see the injustices or people are aggrieved, but also do not feel comfortable enough or are not, don't feel I'm safe enough to be able to report this or to call this an out. So I think for me, the ownership by the staff of organizations when it comes to achievements and commitments with regard to diversity, equity, and inclusion goals cements an organization's commitment to all the aspects that we're looking to achieve as far as these initiatives are concerned. Additionally, for me, I think the more differences that are integrated within an organization, the greater the impact of communication in achieving the goals. Communication, whether verbally or written or otherwise, is a key driver of organization's culture, whether for the best or for worse. Thus, in any organizations where employees and management respect each other's opinion, people are free to express themselves regardless of their differences, signs a good use of communication to achieve diversity and inclusion. I think it's very important when employees feel safe. When they want to report something, they're not looking at them and saying, because my manager is from this community or from this nationality, then I don't feel the essence of belonging. or because I belong to this minority group, then I don't see the essence of belonging. But I think when we communicate in a way that champions diversity, inclusion, and equity, in a way that says we belong here, we are all for the same organization and for the same achievements, or for the same mandate that we are all employed for, we are employed to achieve, then I think everyone feels a sense of belonging. I believe that also another way of measuring the impact of communication will be to analyze the stories being told and the reactions of the same. A lot of the time now, with digital era that we are in, a lot of information concerning organization is out there. It's very easy to look to gauge what is being said concerning a given organization. And when people feel left out or mistreated, or people feel this organization does not live its commitments when it comes to diversity, inclusion, and equity is concerned, then you'll always find these conversations out there. Somebody is able to read, and there have been cases of the same, that a given organization has, people have said, we need to boycott this organization because it does not live through the commitments of diversity or inclusion. And therefore, I think it's very important that communications PR is considered as a way that the public can gain awareness on organizations, culture, organizations, diversity, or commitments as far as this is concerned. The use of communication or PR to put the successes of devolution in the successes of diversity, equity, and inclusion is important for me. And I think the success stories can be used to monitor and analyze public relations on the same, to see whether there's a need to promote transparency, or there's a need to promote a different culture altogether. That one, the one that looks like respects the various cultures, or respects people as far as the inclusion is concerned in any organization. I think all this serves as a compass on whether an organization is heading in the right direction, or whether its actions are credible in the public eye. And so I believe that communication serves a very important role. And as I said, the question was on the impact of communications or PR in measuring the diversity, inclusion, and equity goals. How we report on the achievements, how we share all our achievements with either internal or external organizations. I think it's very important, because then it shows that this is an organization that respects the diversity in terms of culture, the diversity in terms of religion, diversity in terms of our background. So the communication that we put there, for example, including the annual reports, I think it's important when they include this, and the commitments, the progress, where we were, for example, last year, and where we are this year, and maybe where we hope to achieve, where we hope to go next year. So that's when I'm reading about a given organization when it comes to its diversity, inclusion, and equity achievements or commitments, the next year I can easily gauge the progress, that this organization last year was here, but this time it has made a progress, whether it's 5% progress or 10% progress, but this one, it's here today. I think how we communicate the same, or how we share information concerning organization in its commitments to these initiatives, is very key and very important.
So thank you so much, Patience, for speaking to me and answering all my questions in so much detail. And as we've discussed, and things that you've thrown light on today, the EI is most certainly one of the most important factors to really create a cohesive environment with organizations. With that, I would like to end this Q&A session with you. Over to Anubhuti. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Parakit. I'm very happy to be part of this conversation again, to be able to think through how we can bring actionable, long-term actionable diversity, equity, and inclusion goals. As I said, I think this is a commitment that organizations, and especially PR professionals or public relations professionals, need to commit to, so that it does not just remain as ticking the boxes or lip service, but actual translates to actual action in all the organization or workforce that we serve in. We're looking for a future that looks like is happy to include everyone on board, and everyone feels a sense of belonging. And you can only do that by ensuring that we are living the walk, we're talking, walking the talk, and ensuring that these conversations don't just happen, but everyone understands why it is important to bring everyone on board. So thank you so much that in this month, as we think about how we achieve diversity, equity, and inclusion, this is a conversation that is not only happening, for example, in India, but it's happening across and globally. So I'm very honored to be part of this conversation today. Thank you so much for choosing Kenya and for choosing Patience Nyange to be part of this conversation today. I send you greetings from the Public Relations Society in Kenya. Thank you.